To order. Clerk, please call the roll.
Certainly. Councilmember Soria.
Here.
Councilmember Carbasi.
Present.
Councilmember Arias.
Here.
Councilmember Chavez.
Here.
Councilmember Bredefeld.
Here.
Vice President Maxwell.
Present.
And Council President Esparza.
Present. Okay. Can I get a motion to approve the agenda?
Still move.
Second.
A motion and a second. Clerk, please call the roll on the approval of the agenda.
Certainly. Agenda. All right, approval of agenda, motion by Soria, second by Arias. Or, here we, oh, sorry, motion by Arias, second by Soria. Councilmember Soria.
Yes.
Councilmember Carbasi.
Aye.
Councilmember Arias.
Aye.
Councilmember Chavez.
Yes.
Councilmember Bredefeld.
Yes.
Vice President Maxwell.
Aye.
And Council President Esparza.
Aye.
All right, 7-0.
Okay. We have one item. Clerk, you read that off. The one item we're taking on today in the special meeting.
Certainly. This is a joint special meeting with the successor agency, resolution finding good cause and public benefit for extension of the South Fulton Street mixed-use residential rental project pursuant to Fresno Municipal Code Section 4-204 relating to disposition of real property.
Okay, fantastic. I see Councilmember Soria, you have your hand raised on Zoom.
Yes, Council President, thank you. So I just want to make sure that I publicly notice, per legal counsel's advice, I will continue to recuse myself on this item, but just wanted to make sure that I participate in the initial meeting so folks know that, obviously, I'm still here, but I won't be participating in the discussion today. If legal counsel needs to add anything, but I think that it's pretty clear from their advice.
Okay, that sounds sounds good. Thank you.
So I will be stepping away as you guys are having this conversation.
All right, appreciate it. All right, so I think what we'll do, well, Councilmember Arias, you have something to add before we proceed?
Yes, Council President. First, I just want to say thank you to my colleagues for making time to attend this special meeting. As you know, since the last extension of this item, the project has grown from 54 units to 99 units, essentially doubled in the amount of units for the downtown Fulton corridor. We heard from my council colleagues the last two times that we discussed this item, one in closed session and one in public, and the applicant has made some adjustments, and I will now turn it over to the applicant to any presentation or questions that the council may have. But again, thank you for making the time, and this is an important and long-awaited project for downtown Fresno. It has taken much longer than we all anticipated, but just to provide the council context, some of these development agreements have been in place for more than 20 years. The Armenian town, I think, is going on 22 years. The housing project on Van Ness and Stanislaus is going on, I think, 15 years. These things take quite a bit of time. This project has completed the first phase, which was a demolition of the buildings. It has completed the second phase, which is securing the financing and the design of the building, finally approved by city and flood control. And now it's requesting to enter the third phase, which is construction of the project over the next few months. So with that, I want to again turn over to the applicant or to the council for any questions they might have. And I would like to make a motion to approve the item and then turn it over back to the council.
Councilmember Arias, I'll second your motion. But before we proceed any further, I do want to go to the public on this item, and then we'll come back up here and do the presentation and have a discussion amongst council. So if there's anyone in the chamber, I don't think there is, who would like to speak to this item, please fill out a yellow card, bring it out up to the clerk. If you're on Zoom, please raise your hand. We'll start with Zoom since we have one person with their hand raised, and that will be Lisa Flores.
Good morning, City Council. I hope everybody's having a beautiful day. Unfortunately, I'm here, and why am I here? You know, I think this project needs to be approved and let these people start building. This project is a well thought out and well planned project. 99 units is a lot, especially since they're being financially responsible. They're helping to address, you know, the issues of housing in Fresno, which we all know there's a big issue. And I really liked that they had, you know, spots for low income housing. That means a lot to me, especially since it's affordable. low-income housing for those of us out here. And it also provides diversity that you need in a downtown. Nobody wants to live in a downtown where everybody's affluent. People in Fresno want to live around diversity, and that includes diversity of income. I'm just really hypercritical of those on the council and the mayor who criticize and veto and bring their own personal agenda to this item. This isn't about you. This is not about your ego. This is about providing housing. It is a very good project. You know me, guys, I'll criticize anything, but this is actually a very good project. I asked my questions. They were answered. I was impressed. And I'm a hard person to impress. So I would hope that this project goes through and is built. And to the mayor, shame on you if you veto this, because, we're one Fresno. It's about diversity. And this project has diversity in it. Thank you for your time.
Okay, is there anyone else on Zoom who'd like to speak to this item? Please raise your hands. I don't see anyone else in the chamber. Okay, we'll go ahead and close public comments and come back on up to the council. I'm not sure if the applicant had a brief presentation or not. I know Councilmember Arias had turned the floor over to you, so that's up to you. But otherwise, is there a presentation? If there isn't, it's fine. We can discuss without it.
There we go. We did a presentation 2 weeks ago. My partner, Jeff Eisenstadt, who has been working with me, with the architect. I have the presentation. I can do it again. It's exactly the same presentation that was done 2 weeks ago. Mr. Carbasi, you weren't here, for your benefit. I'm happy to do it. Or we can go to discussion. And one of the things that I want to bring up before we get too deep into this is that as of last night, at about 10 p.m., we reached a settlement agreement where Mr. Frazier has stepped aside from the partnership. Noyan Frazier still is the applicant. If you approve this project today, the extension, we will make application to the Secretary of State this afternoon for a new name that'll be Noyan Eisenstadt, or some acronym with our names or initials in it. And that process will take approximately 2 weeks. But I'm standing here before you of record that Mr. Frazier is no longer a partner in this project. So I'd be happy to do the presentation, or we can go directly to discussion.
I think I'll steer us in the direction of discussion, because you're right. The presentation was conducted before. It's a matter of public record. I think everyone's had the opportunity to see it and read. We'll come back up here to the council. I don't see anyone punched up yet at this point. We do have a motion. We have a second on the floor. So if there isn't any discussion, I'll entertain. Okay, we actually have two folks. We have Councilmember Carbasi, and followed by Councilmember Bredefield.
No. Thank you, Mr. Noyan. No, I did see the presentation as a matter of public record. Marlene, I have some questions for you. So there's now 99 units of housing, correct? Okay. And we are talking about going from what was 10 to 20 affordable units of housing, correct? Now, I think the project is roughly, and Mehmet, correct me if I'm wrong, $29 million now of total financing. Is that correct?
That's correct. In addition, there's approximately $3,200,000 in public state funds for off-sites, bicycle paths and so
Got
forth.
it.
Yes.
So let's just stick with the 29 million
Sure.
now. How much of this is funding from a taxpayer entity like the city or the state? Is it about 10 million, like a third? Is that correct?
Yes, essentially subtracting 19.5 from it, which will be the privately financed. The other parts are public, and then the developer has equity contribution
Right,
of
which I
about,
noticed that 1.3 or something like that.
it's around 1.9.
1.9, oh, that's a lot more. Okay, gotcha. So I'm trying to understand something. The $10 million in public funding, setting aside the $3 million for offsite improvements, the rent that's going to be charged, which is very reasonable, is about $535 is starting. Is that correct?
That's for the affordable units, yes.
Okay. So I have a question. 20 units and $10 million of public money, how many years could we pay the rent for all those folks with $10 million?
55-year covenants.
No, that's not what I'm asking. I'm saying the taxpayers are giving $10 million towards this project. I know we have a housing crisis for 20 units of affordable housing. My question is, that $10 million, it's about, rough math, $500,000 per unit we're subsidizing for affordable housing. I mean, you could buy a nice home with that money. My question is, how many years could we provide housing and pay for rent for someone at $10 million? How many people can we cover in this town?
As an equivalent?
Yes.
As an equivalent? Well, the per unit cost here is, I think, around $294,000, $295,000. So by unit cost, I expect that would be amortized over a 30-year mortgage.
Okay.
If that gets to your question.
Sort of, okay. And then the original date this was supposed to be completed, if I recall from the staff report, was 2019 originally. And I know these projects in downtown take more time because old infrastructure, working with the city, those things are, and other agencies are difficult. Was the original date 2019?
The escrow was to close originally December 2017 from the original DD&A. Is that your question?
That'll work. I'm just trying to see, when was this supposed to originally be built, based on when we were first presented this to the council, when this was first presented to the council?
It was 2017, but if you'll allow me to expand on that. That original DD&A contemplated that the city and developer would seek funding. When that original DD&A was approved, it was known that the city, again, as a joint applicant with the developer, would seek state funds and other funds. And that led to the first extension in June of 2018, because it was only at or around that point that the state funds had been secured. And then further at that point, the city and developer began to seek other sources of funding.
Right.
Thank you.
Okay, no, good question, good point. And then this new extension, this is the fourth or fifth extension?
This would be the fourth today.
And then will the completion date for construction be delayed? Is it 2024 now to 2025, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And then the financing portion, because I believe there was an argument made about, we passed the policy as a council, we wouldn't do this anymore, we wouldn't be extending things anymore because we didn't want land banking. Now, I'm trying to understand why why an exception would be made here, because we made the point that with another project on the other end of the mall, they didn't have the financing in place. Now, Mr. Noyan's invested some of his money, which is pretty considerable. We have $10 million of public money, but the bulk of it, about 2/3, is private sector funding. Has that been identified? Has that been secured? Because I understand this agreement actually extends the deadline because the deadline wasn't met.
They're not a default.
I'm not suggesting that.
Yes.
I'm saying, is the financing in place right now to build this thing if we extend it once again and delay it another year? On top of the 6 years it's behind already.
The piece that's not in place is the private equity conventional financing of $19 million. But the date to secure that in this extension would be March 31st of 23. And it would not be expected that the developer would have secured that until they have completed their building permits and that they have the property in hand, the close of escrow. So those would be the conditions under which then we would see that conventional financing.
Yeah, I just want to make sure we're consistent with other projects that have come forward to this council.
May
What I'm
I-
trying to understand is the financing 100% secure right now?
The part that would normally be expected to be secure is the conventional
But
financing would be...
2/3 of it is not.
That's right, that's
Okay.
right, that's correct.
Okay, that's all I have. Thank you.
Councilmember Bredefield, followed by Councilmember Arias.
Yes. Last, or 2 weeks ago when this came before us, I didn't support this and related it to a couple of things, which I think I've been relating for several times in terms of my difficulty with Mr. Frazier in terms of his history with an audit that's never been adequately addressed or addressed at all, as well as the track record of this project and the history of promises made that things would move along, which they haven't. Timelines weren't met, and so I struggled to support the project 2 weeks ago, didn't support it. So I looked at the timeline of when this all began and the history of approvals and extensions, and it's actually, this would be the 5th, not the 4th. On February 25, 2016, the council approved a DDA with close of escrow on December 31st, 2017. That was approved 6-0. Councilmember Soria was absent, which is interesting to me because just 5 months earlier, on September 24th, 2015, when this council awarded the contract to Granite Park, she was absent on that one too. Now, she attended every meeting before, voted on every project before and every project after, but was absent on that one. And then 5 months later, February 25th, 2016, she just happened to miss the vote on this project as well. Now, I'm sure it's just a coincidence, and the non-inquisitive media will, not look and see if anything's related to that. Of course, later on, she announced that she and Mr. Frazier were involved, but she was absent, and you're supposed to declare why you're absent from a vote. That didn't happen, so there's 2 absences from 2 different projects, both involving Mr. Frazier, but I'm sure the media has no interest in figuring out, is there anything related to that? I'm sure it's just a coincidence. Then, on June 21st, 2018, the council approved a First Amendment to align with the state's award with the close of escrow. And I voted for that. I approved that. So I supported your project. Then on August 15, 2019, and by the way, Mr. Frazier was part of that project at that time as well. However, on August 15, 2019, you came for a Second Amendment to provide, asking for $659,000, as you recall. And as I recall, you said we hadn't figured that out. It was a change in our business model. We needed the extra funds. And I voted no. And I said very clearly, I'm not going to support that. And the council said, no, they're going to support it, and they awarded you an additional $700,000. So I voted no. On November 19th, and as a matter of fact, at the time, I was quoted as saying that I'm troubled, quote, I'm troubled when you have developers in 2016 say their financing and the business model pencils out, but 3 years later, nothing has happened. No dirt was moved, and they came back to the council and asked for more money. I also alluded to the audit again. When there was an audit, a year or so before, there were numerous outstanding egregious irregularities, Bredefeld said. One ought to pause very seriously about whether we want to give that developer $750,000 of more taxpayer money. That was my quote. And Mr. Frazier responded by saying, quote, this project will also help address the housing crisis in Fresno, and Councilmember Bredefeld has a right to oppose it. There is no need to get into a petty back and forth with him when his comments only show he's trying to be relevant, when the issue he makes his attacks on has been resolved, end quote. The fact is, when this was said in 2019, those issues had not been resolved. When I spoke 2 weeks ago and asked about the issues related to the audit 3 years later, those issues still haven't been resolved, according to Mike Lima, our finance director. So again, I'm going to say the same thing that I said 3 years ago that I'm saying today. Those issues were never addressed, and there were significant irregularities, to say the least, and I'm being kind. And yet, this council wants to ignore those situations, and now at the last minute, you're saying that Mr. Frazier's out of the project. That's your decision. But there are significant difficulties with the timelines, with the requesting of more money. And then on November 19th, 2020, you again came back for an extension and amendment to the DDA. I voted no, November 19th in 2020. Then on August 19th, 2021, the council approved a First Amendment that extended the close of escrow from August 31st, 2021 to August 31st, 2022. I voted no. Then 2 weeks ago, I voted no again, as I've outlined. Now, if this is approved today, the new construction completion date would extend to April 30th, 2025. Is that correct? Okay, so that's 6 years behind schedule, 6 years. So that's a problem. The fact that this would be the fifth extension, the fifth, not the fourth, the fifth extension. And Mr. Chitalian, who had a project on the other end of the mall, had 2 extensions before this council rejected him and said, too many extensions. So there's an issue of fairness and obviously treating developers and developments very differently, which led to this council approving the Municipal Code Section 4-204D that mandated no agreement for the disposition of real property shall be extended more than once out of fear of these kinds of situations. And so now we're going to make another request to ignore this effort to hold people accountable for when they make commitments and they have agreements and timelines, that they don't just go 6 years, 7 years, and 8 years. This was talked about from 2014. We're now 8 years later, and we're still requesting delays and extensions, have given additional money, and want to extend this all the way to 2025. I'm not going to support this. This is the wrong direction that this council goes. It's going against its own municipal code that it just approved, and I think it sends a terrible message. I think we need to cancel this. We need to put this out to RFP, request for proposals. If Mr. Nguyen wants to apply again, he's more than welcome to do so. But we ought to give everyone an opportunity to come before this council and bring a project forward that they will actually complete, that it will not take 8 years or 7 years or 6 years or 9 years, that they will actually have a timeline in place. They will actually be financing. They won't come back and change the business model, request additional funds like $750,000. It is time to pull the plug on this project and to say, we're going to open it up. This is what we want as a city and as a council, and who is interested in making a proposal. That's the right thing. That's the fair thing. That's the equitable thing for our city, and that's the right thing to protect our taxpayers and to treat everyone the same and everyone fairly. And it's for that reason that I'm not going to support this once again. I haven't supported it for the last 4 times, not just last 2 weeks ago, for the same reasons I've been outlining last 2 weeks ago that I outlined several years ago.
Councilmember Arias, you're punched up.
Thank you, Council President. Just want to clarify a couple of points for my colleagues. They're right that we passed a policy recently where we put a higher standard for extending agreements that involve city property. But I want to be clear, it was that we wouldn't extend them, but that those extensions would require a supermajority of this council. I support that policy. Others of my colleagues brought that policy forward because it was our way of holding these numerous development agreements to a much higher standard so that they can move forward with development. Secondly, I also want to be clear that the state funding that was provided is not to pay people's rents. It is specifically designed to build permanent housing. It takes quite a bit of time to build permanent housing. As we're going through the motel transition in Parkway Drive, some of those motels will take us several years before we can layer enough financing in place to be able to build it. And then lastly, I just want to point out to my council colleagues that if it is their wish not to extend any agreements that have taken years to develop, I just want to bring to their attention that we have several agreements that have been in place for 15 to 20 years that will be coming before this body pretty soon. That includes Armenian Town that's been in place for more than 20 years and is still vacant land. That is also a development by Mr. Ed Cashin and Mark A. Stone on Vanis and Stanislaus. I think they're going on their 10th year. Also other developments in the downtown area by numerous developers. And if it is going to be our position that those things would not be extended any longer because they've taken too many years, to secure the financing or too many years to develop, then I just want to remind folks that that's going to send a pretty chilling effect to anyone who takes the risk of developing in downtown. Every development in downtown has taken years to come forward. I'm working on a development right now with Residency that's taken a couple years just to be able to get the financing in place and get the approvals from the numerous agencies that have to sign off. You may be able to construct. The Ironbird Lofts took several years and extensions and significant amount of RDA, city and government money to be able to build. But nobody would argue that those projects are not worthy and have been added to the downtown atmosphere and rebuilding of our city. So I just wanted to bring it to your attention. I will honor the will of this council. But if we're going to set a precedent that any project that's taken more than the initial timeline that was proposed, then we're going to set ourselves up for denying several renewals coming forward in the next few months.
Anyone else wish to speak on council? I don't see anyone else punched up. Okay, we have a motion, we have a second. If everyone's okay, we'll go ahead and call the roll call vote. So we have one member on Zoom.
All right, and this is an item that requires 5 affirmative votes. Councilmember Carbasi.
Nay.
Councilmember Arias.
Yes.
Councilmember Chavez.
Yes.
Councilmember Bredefeld.
No.
Vice President Maxwell.
Aye.
Council President Esparza.
Aye.
4-2, item fails for lack of 5 affirmative votes.
Okay.
Thank you, council, for the time.
Meeting's adjourned.